The ballroom glittered with chandeliers. Golden light bounced off the polished marble floor, where women in designer gowns whispered and men in sharp tuxedos shook hands. It was the charity gala of the year, an event where wealth wasn't just shown, it was performed. Among the crowd stood Elena, a quiet woman in her late 30s. She wore a simple navy blue dress, elegant but modest compared to the sparkling gowns around her. Her hair was neatly tied back, her smile soft, almost shy. Elena wasn't used to these gatherings, but she had come to support her husband Daniel, who had been invited as a keynote speaker. Daniel was not just any man. Though he kept a low profile, he was the mind behind one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the country. But unlike most wealthy men in that ballroom, Daniel never flaunted his fortune. He lived quietly, never trading kindness for status. But in a world like this, kindness was often mistaken for weakness. That's when she entered Victoria Lancaster. The crowd seemed to part for her. She was tall, draped in a diamond-studded gown that shimmered with every step. Her hair, perfectly styled, fell over her shoulders like golden waves. Victoria was known as one of the city's most influential socialites, famous for her parties, her money, and her cruelty. She spotted Elena standing quietly by the corner, sipping water instead of champagne. A smile, sharp and mocking, spread across her face. "Well, well," Victoria's voice sliced through the music, drawing a few curious glances. "Who invited you? Did they mistake this for a church gathering?" A ripple of laughter rose from the group of women around her. Elena's cheeks flushed, but she didn't answer. She wasn't used to defending herself in public. Victoria walked closer, her heels clicking like a drumbeat. "That dress, oh dear. Did you get it from a discount store? How adorable." The women chuckled again, but their eyes flickered with something else, nervousness. They all knew Victoria's power, and none dared cross her. Elena forced a smile, whispering softly, "I like it." Her words were gentle, but Victoria only laughed louder. "You like it? Darling, that's not fashion, it's charity." She leaned in, lowering her voice so only Elena could hear. "A woman like you will always stay invisible. Quiet, plain, forgettable." Elena's hand tightened on her glass, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence was often stronger than words. But someone else had heard. From across the room, Daniel had been watching. He saw his wife, his Elena, standing small under the weight of cruel laughter. Something cold settled in his chest. When it was time for him to take the stage, Daniel walked up with calm grace. The crowd applauded, expecting the usual speech about business and philanthropy. Victoria smirked, twirling her glass of champagne, confident that her mocking whispers were buried in the noise. But then Daniel began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried easily across the hall, steady, powerful. "Tonight we gather not only to celebrate generosity, but to remember its meaning. True generosity isn't just in the checks we write or the jewelry we display. It is in the respect we show, even to those we think cannot fight back." The room grew quiet. People shifted uncomfortably. Victoria's smirk faltered. Daniel's eyes moved across the room and landed on Elena. "My wife," he said slowly, "is the strongest woman I know. She has walked through storms you could never imagine. She has carried more weight on her shoulders in silence than some of us do with all our noise. And tonight I want you all to know, if respect is not given to her, then none of us deserve respect at all." Gasps filled the hall. Heads turned toward Elena, who stood frozen, her heart thundering. Victoria's hand trembled against her glass. She tried to laugh, but it sounded thin, forced. "Oh, come now, Daniel, surely we're not making speeches about..." But Daniel cut her off, his voice sharper now. "Some people think wealth gives them the right to mock others. But wealth without humility is nothing but poverty in disguise." The room went silent. The chandeliers gleamed overhead, casting light on faces filled with shock. And then Daniel did something that left everyone speechless. He stepped away from the podium, walked across the room, and took Elena's hand in front of the entire crowd. With steady eyes, he said, "From this night forward, no one will ever make you feel small again." The ballroom held its breath. Whispers began to spread like wildfire. Some looked at Victoria, whose face had drained of color. Others stared at Elena as if seeing her for the first time. And then, just when everyone thought the moment was over, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out something that would shatter the arrogance of the entire room. The ballroom was silent, every pair of eyes fixed on Daniel as he slipped his hand into his suit pocket. Time seemed to freeze. Even the orchestra, sensing the tension, softened their instruments until only the faint hum of a cello remained. Daniel drew out a small, velvet box. Gasps rippled through the hall. Was he really about to do what they thought? Victoria's lips curled in disbelief. "Surely not," she whispered, clutching her glass so tightly that her knuckles whitened. Daniel turned to Elena, his voice steady, carrying the kind of power that didn't need to shout. "Elena," he said, opening the box to reveal a ring that sparkled like captured starlight. "When we first married, we could barely afford a simple band. We promised each other that love mattered more than gold. And it always has." He paused, his gaze never leaving hers. "But tonight, in front of all these people who think they know what wealth is, I want them to see what real wealth looks like. It's not in diamonds, not in silk, not in titles. It's in a woman who stands with grace even when mocked. In a woman who never needed a crown to look like a queen." A hush swept across the room. Elena's eyes welled with tears. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Daniel." Daniel slipped the dazzling ring onto her finger. But it wasn't just the ring that shocked the crowd, it was what came next. Because Daniel turned his eyes directly toward Victoria. "Some people think mocking another woman makes them powerful," he said, his voice echoing like steel. "But tonight you have all witnessed the truth. Power belongs to the one who lifts others up, not the one who tears them down." The crowd shifted, whispers buzzing. Several women who had laughed earlier now looked at Victoria with unease, some even stepping back from her. For the first time in years, the untouchable socialite looked small. But Victoria wasn't one to back down easily. She straightened her shoulders, forcing a laugh that rang hollow. "Oh, please, Daniel," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "We were only having a little fun. Must everything be turned into a grand performance? Surely your quiet wife can handle a harmless joke." Her words cut through the air like poison. Elena lowered her eyes, the sting fresh in her chest. But Daniel's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, his tall frame casting a shadow that seemed to stretch over Victoria herself. "No," he said firmly, his voice resonating with the authority of a man who commanded empires. "What you call a joke, I call cruelty. And what you dismiss as harmless, I call cowardice." The room went dead silent. The chandeliers glittered above, reflecting in the sea of eyes now trained on the confrontation. The whispers had died away. People weren't just watching, they were choosing sides. One elderly gentleman at the back cleared his throat. "His right," he muttered. Heads turned toward him. He was a retired judge respected in the city. His words carried weight. "I've seen enough people humiliated in the name of fun. It is never harmless." Victoria's face flushed crimson. She tried to laugh again, but the sound cracked in her throat. Her allies, those who usually clung to her every word, avoided her gaze. Some began to drift away from her side. For the first time, the queen of high society was standing alone. Elena, trembling but resolute, looked at Victoria. Her voice was soft, yet it pierced the heavy air. "You said I was invisible. But maybe you only wished I was." The crowd gasped. Elena had spoken. And in that moment, her quiet dignity shone brighter than all the jewels in the room. Daniel placed his arm protectively around her shoulders, but his eyes never left Victoria. "You wanted to make her small," he said, his tone sharp as glass, "but all you've done is reveal how small you truly are." The orchestra, almost instinctively, began to play again, a slow, swelling melody that seemed to underline the shift in the room. The power had changed hands. But just as the atmosphere tilted in Elena's favor, a commotion stirred at the far end of the hall. The double doors burst open, and a man in a dark suit strode in, his face pale, his eyes scanning the crowd. The whispers returned, louder this time. Victoria turned sharply, her face draining of color. "No," she muttered under her breath. The man's gaze locked onto her. "Victoria Lancaster," he said, his voice booming across the marble hall, "you can mock all you want, but tonight your secrets won't stay hidden any longer." The entire ballroom froze again. People leaned forward, curiosity and fear mingling in their eyes. Elena clutched Daniel's hand. "What's happening?" she whispered. Daniel's expression hardened. "Something she's been hiding," he murmured. Victoria's mask of arrogance faltered. For the first time, her confidence cracked. She stepped back, shaking her head, her once unchallenged reign slipping through her trembling fingers. And then, before the stunned crowd, the man pulled out a folder thick with documents. He raised it high and declared, "The truth about Victoria Lancaster begins tonight." The ballroom trembled with whispers as the man held the thick folder aloft. The chandeliers glittered, but the golden light now seemed harsh, exposing secrets that had long been buried. Victoria's painted smile was gone. Her hand trembled against her jeweled clutch. For the first time, her confidence, the armor she wore like a crown, began to crack. The man's voice boomed again. "Ladies and gentlemen, you see a woman of diamonds and wealth before you. But behind the glitter lies a truth she's kept hidden for years. Tonight, that truth comes to light." The guests leaned closer, their curiosity sharpened like knives. Elena felt her heartbeat pounding. Daniel's arm was firm around her, protective, but even he was watching with narrowed eyes, waiting. Victoria tried to laugh, but the sound rang false, desperate. "Who even are you?" she snapped, her voice wavering. "What nonsense are you spouting in the middle of a gala?" The man stepped forward, his gaze steady. "My name is Richard Hale. And I'm an auditor, one who has been investigating your financial dealings for months." Gasps cut through the crowd. People who had once admired Victoria's fortune leaned back, unease flickering in their eyes. Victoria's voice shook, though she tried to keep it sharp. "You dare accuse me? In front of everyone? This is slander." But Richard wasn't finished. He opened the folder and spread several documents across a nearby table. Papers fluttered, numbers and signatures visible under the light. He spoke with cold precision. "Fraud. Embezzlement. Millions funneled through shell companies, stolen from charities you claim to support. You mocked others in the name of wealth, Victoria, but your wealth is nothing but stolen lies." The room erupted. Voices clashed in shock. Some gasped, some murmured in outrage. The orchestra faltered mid-note, instruments silenced by the storm of scandal. Victoria's face went pale, then flushed crimson. "Lies!" she screamed. "All lies. This is an attack." But her voice wavered. Her eyes darted, searching for allies, yet the women who once stood at her side now stepped back, unwilling to burn with her downfall. Elena stared, stunned. She had expected cruelty from Victoria, but this, a life built on deceit, was beyond her imagination. She whispered to Daniel. She pretended to be untouchable all this time. Daniel's jaw clenched. "Pride always hides a weakness," he murmured. Richard wasn't done. He pulled out photographs next, images of Victoria signing secret contracts, meeting with men in shadowy offices, transferring money to offshore accounts. Each photo was a dagger. Gasps deepened. Some people covered their mouths. A wealthy couple near the front whispered, "We invested with her. What have we done?" Victoria staggered, gripping the table for support. Her diamonds seemed to lose their shine under the weight of the truth. "Finally," she snapped. Her voice was shrill, almost hysterical. "You're all fools. You think he is telling the truth? You think I would stoop so low?" Her eyes darted wildly until they landed on Elena. In a flash of rage, she pointed a trembling finger. "This is her. She's behind this. That quiet little nobody, she's jealous and she's turned everyone against me." The crowd gasped again, their attention swinging toward Elena. Murmurs rose like waves. Elena froze, the spotlight of accusations suddenly burning on her. For years she had lived quietly, unnoticed, invisible. And now Victoria was trying to twist the knife to make her the villain. But before Elena could speak, Daniel stepped forward. His voice rang with thunder. Enough! The room silenced instantly. Daniel's eyes burned as he looked at Victoria. You've mocked her, belittled her, and now, when your lies are exposed, you dare to drag her name into your filth? No more. Tonight, the world sees you for what you are. A thief. A coward. A pretender. Victoria's breath hitched. The walls around her, built from fear and status, were collapsing brick by brick. But then something unexpected happened. A voice rose from the back of the room. An older woman, dressed simply but with dignity, stepped forward. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes burned with truth. I know this woman, she said, pointing at Victoria. Years ago, she promised to fund our orphanage. She took our donations and the money disappeared. We never saw a single dollar. Children went hungry while she threw parties in diamond gowns. The crowd erupted again, this time with outrage. Murmurs turned to shouts. How could she? Disgusting. All this time, lies. Victoria stumbled back, her world collapsing. She looked less like a queen now and more like a cornered animal. Elena, still trembling, whispered to Daniel, Why is this happening now? Why here? Daniel's eyes narrowed, watching Richard, the auditor, who hadn't moved an inch. Because, he said slowly, truth has a way of arriving when arrogance is at its peak. Victoria tried one last desperate move. She grabbed a glass of champagne, raised it high, and shouted over the chaos. Listen to me. You can't believe them. I am Victoria Lancaster. I made this city's society. Without me, none of you would. But her words were drowned out by a surge of boos and angry voices. The spell she had cast for years was broken. And just as the crowd turned on her, Richard spoke again, his voice cutting through like a blade. This folder, he lifted it higher, is only the beginning. There is one more document inside. And it will change not just how you see Victoria, but how you see someone else in this very room. The crowd froze. Gasps returned, louder than before. Heads turned in confusion. Who else was involved? Even Daniel's expression shifted, his brow furrowing. Elena's grip on his hand tightened. Victoria's eyes went wide with panic. No! Don't you dare, she screamed, lunging toward Richard. But he pulled the final paper free, and the room seemed to hold its breath as he prepared to reveal it. The ballroom felt like a storm frozen in time. Every guest stood silent, eyes locked on the folder in Richard Hale's hand. The chandeliers glistened above, casting sharp light on faces tense with anticipation. Victoria Lancaster, once the queen of high society, now looked desperate. Her diamond gown shimmered, but her trembling hands betrayed her fear. She lunged toward Richard, screaming, Stop! Don't you dare show them! But Richard stepped back, calm, unshaken. He pulled the final paper from the folder and held it high for all to see. This document, he said, his voice steady, is the signature of the person who helped Victoria hide her fraud. Someone in this room who enabled her crimes for years. Gasps tore through the hall. Heads turned wildly, whispers colliding in panic. Elena's grip on Daniel's hand tightened. Her voice trembled. Who could it be? Daniel's eyes narrowed, watching carefully, his body tense as if preparing for battle. Richard unfolded the page slowly, deliberately. It is the signature of, he paused, letting the silence thunder, Victoria's own husband. The room exploded. Shouts. Gasps. Disbelief. The crowd roared in shock. And there, near the front of the ballroom, a man in a silver tuxedo stood frozen, Charles Lancaster. Victoria's husband. His face drained of color. Sweat beaded his forehead. No, he whispered, shaking his head. This is a setup. But Richard's voice was unyielding. Charles Lancaster signed off on the transactions. He funneled the money through their accounts. He was her partner in crime. Victoria spun on him, her face twisted with fury. You fool! You said no one would ever find out. The guests gasped louder. The once powerful couple now tore at each other like animals in front of everyone. Charles grabbed her arm, snarling, "You wanted the diamonds. The parties. You dragged me into this. And you enjoyed every second of it." Victoria spat back. "Don't you dare blame me." The hall was chaos, shouts, gasps, cameras flashing as journalists scribbled notes. The empire of the Lancasters was crumbling in real time. Elena stood in shock, her heart racing. She whispered, "They spent years mocking others, pretending to be above everyone, and all along they were thieves." Daniel's voice was calm but laced with steel. "Pride always falls hardest." Richard raised his hand for silence, his voice commanding the room. "The evidence will be handed to the authorities. But tonight, let this be remembered: arrogance collapses when truth arrives." Security moved in, surrounding Victoria and Charles. Their protests, once thunderous, now sounded weak, pathetic. They were escorted out under a storm of angry whispers and cold stares. For the first time, the ballroom felt lighter, like a toxic cloud had lifted. And then something unexpected happened. The elderly woman who had spoken earlier, the one from the orphanage, approached Elena. Her eyes glistened with gratitude. "My dear," she said softly, "tonight you stood with grace when most would have crumbled. You didn't need jewels to shine. You showed every person here what true dignity looks like." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She wasn't used to being noticed, let alone praised. For years she had blended into the background, overshadowed by louder voices. Tonight, her quiet strength had spoken louder than cruelty. Daniel kissed her hand gently, his voice warm but firm. "From now on, no one will ever doubt your worth again. You're the reason I stand tall. And I will make sure the world knows it." The crowd, once filled with mockery and whispers, now broke into applause, soft at first, then rising until the hall shook with it. For Elena. For the woman they had once overlooked. Victoria and Charles were gone, their reign ended not by wealth or power, but by truth. And at the center of it all stood Elena, quiet, dignified, and finally seen. Daniel looked into her eyes and whispered, so only she could hear, "They tried to make you small. But tonight the world saw who you truly are. My queen." Elena smiled through her tears. For once, she didn't feel invisible. She felt radiant. And as the applause thundered, echoing against the marble walls, it became clear. The night didn't belong to Victoria. It didn't belong to wealth or arrogance. It belonged to the quiet woman who had finally been heard. The end.